First up is a film called Armageddon Time. It's from director-writer James Gray, who most recently did Ad Astra, and I did not enjoy this movie for several reasons. I think the first of which is just not having any additional context for the movie and the things I'm going to go into. I was pretty bored by it, and I am someone who definitely has a tolerance for things that are more experimental with plot structure or things that are more free-flowing. I don't have a problem with that if you have compelling characters, if there's anything interesting going on. And this film has pockets of, I would say, decent to interesting, but not enough to salvage the whole thing. It's 2 hours, but it felt much longer to me. I, strangely, am going to give a shout out to the kid actors. I thought those parts of the story were the most compelling and interesting to me. Also, I should caveat, it is a semi-autobiographical journey about James Gray's upbringing in New York as a Jewish kid. And part of it centers around his character, based on his character's, relationship with a young black boy. So that's a whole movie in and of itself that has its own major issues. So that's one of the things I'll delve into. But honestly, those were maybe some of the better parts. And then there's a whole relationship with the boy and his grandpa that I actually thought was another decent part of the movie. And then there's the relationship between the boy and his parents. And I should say that his parents are played by Anne Hathaway and Jeremy Strong, and his grandfather is played by Anthony Hopkins. So you have these powerhouse actors in it. And yet, so I also need to take a look at this from a cultural lens, where I myself am at least culturally Jewish. A whole important part of this whole story is his Jewish upbringing and otherness as a byproduct of it, which is such a relevant thing right now. I know he couldn't have predicted that with the release date, but there could not be a more timely conversation revolving around this, and yet none of your main actors, and I didn't mention it, but Tova Feldshuh is in it, but you have these three powerhouse actors, and yet none of them are Jewish. And the whole point is about that experience. And it's not to say that you can't have, it's Judaism is an identity, not necessarily a race. We're not talking about Israelis. But by the same token, are you really telling me that we didn't have some amazing Jewish actors in Hollywood and like this is your whole background and you couldn't bring that level of it to it? I also didn't feel like any of the parents' roles or Anthony Hopkins' grandparents' roles, none of it was like, Anne Hathaway is the only actress who could have played this for me. I understand why they've made this compromise, which is a really frustrating experience as an audience goer. And I didn't realize it till after, but I kept scratching my head during, and I was like, I don't think... they're also putting on the accent. It's a bit of a New York accent, but it's also heavily influenced by Yiddish and other, it starts to be like, are we making fun of it? You wander into dangerous territory there, and it took me personally out of it. I'm going to guess a lot of people are going to overlook that, which is kind of disappointing because I wish, we applied levels of authenticity, or at least people had equal opportunities in terms of performances. But putting that part of it aside, then you've also got an additional few layers for me. One, there's just a bunch of casual racism in this that doesn't really get addressed. And I'm like, a lot of the storyline is about being on the right side of things and standing up for the underdogs, even when it's not appropriate or whatever it is. I obviously there's some Holocaust ties there, but then at the same time, you're throwing in casual racism towards different groups. And in this case, Asian groups, which is the other half of my heritage, which it's just a few one-off lines, but it completely undermines the whole premise of it, where it's like, cool, basically be nice to black people, but we don't care about other groups. Like I wish it just wasn't so divided into columns like that. But those things were all major detractors. And then on top of it, that some of the plots center around that the plot itself is messy. I think there are a lot of things we could have cut out and could have been streamlined or added in about other pockets of it that would have been more interesting. But I think in trying to balance the fact that you've got Anne Hathaway and Jeremy Strong, I feel like they were sort of trying to over-index on their performances, even though the meat and the joy of the story, not even joy, happy joy, but just the interesting parts of the story lay elsewhere. There's also tumultuous parts in the parental relationships that are, not easy to watch, but I think could have been done really well. But because everything else was just so mushy, It's very hard to articulate some of the reasons why I was just unsettled and bored and frustrated by this film. But I think bored is the ultimate thing, and that's like the best thing I can say about it. The worst thing I can say about it was kind of offended by parts of it. I don't think anybody else is going to cause an uproar over it, which is sometimes disappointing, but in good conscience, cannot recommend Armageddon Time. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. And then we're going to go on a roller coaster ride this week, so stick with me, please. I promise you it will get better. But the next film I have is called My Policeman, and oh man, okay. So when I watched Don't Worry, Darling, I was like, there are parts of Harry Styles' performance, because Harry Styles stars in this, in which I went, you know what, he's not the worst. They're asking him to do some capital A acting in Don't Worry, Darling that just didn't work, but there are parts of his performance that were, not offensive, I'll say. So maybe it was just the wrong role for him. And then watching My Policeman, where sometimes he's asked to do capital A acting and once again does not deliver. I'm just like, you know what, we should stick to what we know, and that is music. And I guess music videos are a form of acting, but it's a different form of acting. So My Policeman is following 3 people, and we see 2 different age brackets of them. Harry Styles plays the young version of this character. Emma Corrin plays the young version of a woman, and there's another man involved, played by David Dawson as they're young. And then when they are older, it's Linus Roach as Harry Styles, Gina McKee, who I have missed on screen. She's wonderful. I forgot about her, which is sad, but she's wonderful in this. As the older version of the woman, and Rupert Everett as the older version of David Dawson's character. You're never going to remember any of that. But either way, 2 sets of cast, right? And at first, I was very confused as to who mapped to whom in the young cast. Obviously, the woman, there's only one woman, and so I was like, cool, I know who is you. But for whatever reason, could not peg that the 2 men were, for whatever reason, I thought Rupert Everett was supposed to be older Harry Styles. I was like, oh, okay. And not that there's anything wrong with Rupert Everett now, but I was like, oh, something has happened to this character, and we will understand a lot of these things. And nope, I was wrong on that front. So it is the story of their relationship. I hope this isn't a major spoiler because it's in all of the marketing, but basically Harry Styles is, I don't know, either bisexual or straight up gay, and yet the first part of the film takes place in the 1950s, and so that was obviously not an easy thing to be out about. The other character, I'm just gonna call him by their character's name. Patrick is the other character who's more educated, refined, etc. Harry Styles' Tom is a policeman, and then the female character is named Marion. She's a teacher, and so it's about the sort of love triangle between the 3 of them. And we have seen the stories before, right, where the biggest impediment to these characters is, homophobia and laws existing around homophobia and all these things. But by the same token, it's horrible that, character people had to be in the closet, the horrible treatment. You see, some of the results of said horrible treatment and the really terrible ramifications of it. By the same token, I will say that the characters themselves are not the most sympathetic in terms of how they choose to engage in their behaviors. And I do normally like a morally ambiguous story when there's depth to the characters, but I felt this was about as deep. This was the most one-dimensional thing I've seen in a long time. The most rudimentary form of a love triangle, and I don't know if there was a way to salvage this, and the motivations of them were weird. And then you've also got this sort of very gimmicky feeling, over-sexualizing of some of the sequences. And if I have to see another bad Harry Styles sex scene this year, I cannot do it. I never want to see one again. There are so many punctuated into this, and then that's, on top of having seen Don't Worry, Darling, it's, I think it's stunt casting, right? And so you've got these scenes and this actor who aren't living up to the expectations of what the script may have had as a potential. And then you're expecting audiences to be like, oh my God, it's so great because they already like Harry Styles or whatever it might be. I think it's detractive from all the other elements that go into this. And so many other things do go into making a film. So it's gimmicky, right? It's gimmicky. The characters are one-dimensional. Yes, there is an inherent struggle to, and you have sympathy for them because of this. But also when they're behaving like jerks, I'm like, well, some of this you deserve. A lot of it you don't. You don't deserve the societal part of it, but some of it's you being like a not particularly thoughtful person. Again, I don't want to it's so complicated, right? Because if their gay relationships had been allowed, some of these things wouldn't have happened. But I just wish this particular story, not people in general, this particular story had given us more about them as people, aside from their horniness from each other. And like, you get like one character bit here and there for each of them, but I don't even think the female Marion, the character, like gets a lot of that. Hers is just likes the boy. So I don't want to be flippant, and I don't want to be dismissive of the actual experience of this, but this doesn't feel like the most compelling way they could have conveyed the just absolute, direness of not being able to express yourself as, your full identity. So, and again, I couldn't get over the Harry Styles acting. I went in with a clean slate. I was like, cool, maybe he'll be fine in this. And then the film just, again, gave into the sort of pandering and gimmick of, we have Harry Styles in this. So I'm only going to give it 1 out of 5. The next film I have is called Causeway, and it's out on Apple TV+. And this is definitely another capital A acting film. And I wish that I could give parts of this film a rating and then other parts just like cut them out. So it's got Jennifer Lawrence, and she plays a vet who has returned from Afghanistan. She's experienced a major trauma, and so dealing with that, she goes back to her hometown in New Orleans and is sort of navigating civilian life, but also recovering from a major injury and all these things. And then, runs into Brian Tyree Henry, who, comes into her life and their relationship, and then her relationship with her mom. It's definitely an Oscar bait film, but the execution of it, there's just a few things in it that prevent it from being in that echelon. And it's the story, not necessarily the performances. It's a very reserved performance from Jennifer Lawrence, and I actually really liked that from her. I think the last thing I saw her in was Don't Look Up, which, again, I think I always knew she is a fantastic actor. I remember seeing Winter's Bone in theaters and being like, what is happening? Who is this human being? So I've never doubted that, but I think some of the roles she's taken, the scripts or whatever the story has gotten in the way of her getting into that, again, capital A acting moments that are, and this is a less flashy movie, which is great, right? But by the same token, the story itself does things that I was like, this is like, there were other ways to, and I don't want to spoil them, but there were other ways to accomplish this and have these characters intertwine each other in their lives and deal with their traumas, because I think the theme of this movie is trauma, essentially, that did not have to be as, it's not pandering, but it feels pedestrian, like the algorithm wrote it or something like that. I'm like, if you'd just done one more pass of it, that there was a way to do this that doesn't undermine like the inherent way you've set these characters up. But either way, I think it's a quiet, it's an understated film. It's very contained, which is also semi-refreshing. I like that we essentially live in their worlds, but again, because of where the plot goes, and it does this, it establishes these characters. We don't have to learn too much about them to understand who they are. And then it's like, BT dubs, I'm going to pull the rug out and counteract all the things I've established so far. And then, we'll see where the end goes. So I really wish it hadn't done that, because up until that point, I was like, yeah, this is a really good movie. And then when I saw it starting to telegraph, I was like, no, please don't do it. There's a world in which we get, and then they did it. So because of that, I don't think, sadly, it's going to hit that wider awards tier that it's looking for, but I do think that as a performance study it's fine, and if you're feeling in the mood for some semi-bleak material, this will scratch that itch. Again, they play so well off each other that I really wish that it had done that service for them, but overall I still think it's watchable. I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 5. And then my last film this week, I told you we were going on a roller coaster. Thank you for sticking with, if you stuck with to this point. It is Decision to Leave, and it is by Park Chan-wook, and I loved this movie. And I worry about saying that because I know that it was already getting overhyped for me, and so I don't want to do that to anyone else. But, just to bring the whole theme together, if you want quiet performances, if you want, semi-meandering but also structured plot with like contemplative things, if you want beautiful, beautiful cinematography, this is your movie. It also has complicated romances. So all the things that were missing or detractive from the other movies this week, you can find in Decision to Leave. It's a mystery. It's a romance. It centers around a police detective and, a woman who comes into his life. It's got a little bit of like Sherlock vibe sometimes. Pick your iteration of Sherlock, but a little bit Benedict Cumberbatch, a little bit in terms of like the visuals of problem solving. Again, the visuals themselves, so gorgeous. The cinematography is amazing. The music is good. I like a movie in which it telegraphs just the right amount of info for you, especially when it's a crime thriller. I think there's like beautiful longing in this. There's also moral ambiguity, which is always fun. So I don't want to talk too much about the plot itself, but I do think that this is a great example of a movie that, has all of these elements and can do it well. And please get over the barrier of subtitles. Like, it's so worth watching. I believe it's out on Mubi for folks right now, but Decision to Leave, Park Chan-wook, it's a 4.3 out of 5 for me.